The Thing of Archery Range Road, written by Y.T. Demising End. I'm currently 20 years old. Not a lot of spectacular things have happened to me. Well, besides this story. This story happened to me in 2017. I'm an avid gamer, playing games like Call of Duty, Halo, Siege, basically any game you can think of. Archery Range Road in Casper, Wyoming is any typical road from any typical neighborhood. At least it was, until this instance occurred. Fortnite had just come out and I was 19 years old. My friends told me to try it. I did like Epic Games' work with Gears of War, so I figured that I'd give it a try. It was 1:39 a.m. I was saying goodnight to my friends, but I wanted to keep playing. Something about Fortnite had made me addicted to it. So fast forward further into the night. It was now 3:32 a.m. I was so droopy and tired at this point. As I played my game, where I got my first win, I thought that in the corner of my room, there was a man standing so still. It was actually my coat on a hanger. It was one of those classic times where your brain is playing tricks on you. After that, I figured that I would call it quits after my third game win. I was getting the hang of the game. I noticed then that I had yet to close my blinds, so I went over to close them. I didn't want a peeping Tom now, did I? Until I reached the window, I didn't see any lights besides the blue light coming from my TV. Then, the street lamps blasted my face. It made me want to shelter my eyes. I reached my right hand over to pull the blinds down, but I noticed something then. Something in the road. I have never seen anything like this. A long shadow stretched across the road. What was causing the shadow looked like another shadow, standing up though. Even though it had no face, I felt like it was staring right at me. I had a weird sensation. It was like my body felt cold, like I had plunged into a frozen lake and I couldn't climb out. My mind wasn't in reality. My body shook and quivered at this feeling. With one swift motion, I closed the blinds, blocking out its stare. Did I think that my mind was playing tricks on me at that time? Yes. But now, I feel like this thing was real. Like it's haunting me. You see, yesterday I stayed up late. I was playing Grand Theft Auto. I had just completed the Series A funding heist with some of my friends. We all shared equal profit off the heist. $126,250 of the heist. With that, I had just enough money to buy the cheapest company. Maze Banks, it is, at least I think. Anyways, back to the story. I said goodnight to my friends and I was about to log off. I turned off my Xbox and then my TV, and then I went to shut the blinds. Only when I reached the window, I saw it again. Now, keep in mind that I had seen it about 10 times after the first encounter. But this one, well, it was different. It was closer to the window, but still at a distance, but it was notably closer. I could finally make out its facial features. It looked youthful. It was black and smooth. And when I say it was black, I mean all black. However, I could see that it had eye sockets, but of course no eyes. An indent came off its face, which I assume was a nose. Its mouth was carved, and it was smiling. It was a smile that would reach from ear to ear, if it had ears. And then I felt it. The sensation of cold, of the frozen lake. My body quivered again, but it was different. I now felt hot as well. It was like my body was touching molten lava. like I was in 120 degrees Fahrenheit weather. I noticed my hand on the blinds felt cold, and I felt my body being penetrated by its stare. I had to do it. I closed the blinds. After that, for the rest of the night, I did research. Apparently, a man killed himself in the house we are currently living in. 4 teens have died here before that as well. One was a female, the rest were male. It wasn't until I did some more digging that I found something. Even though the cause of death was different between the teens, one died of a heart attack, one got terrible cancer, one had hypothermia, and one died by overheating. But there was a trend. They would describe the exact same thing. The thing that I'm experiencing right now. Cold, like being in a frozen lake. Everything. The female went to a therapist because she claimed to see a man of all black outside her house, and that her body went cold instantly. She had had about 10 of these incidents, just like me, before that one that was different. In this one, she said that she was also hot. She told her therapist about this 10 hours after it happened, and 14 hours later, she was found dead. Understand that I'm currently freaking out. I'm typing this on what I can assume is my final night. So, I am hurrying to get this information out. I found out that the man that killed himself in the house was found dead with black paint all over him and his eyes cut out. No wonder why the creature looked so youthful yesterday. He was only 25 years old when he died. The wife was arrested under the assumption that she killed him. She doesn't recall a thing, but the neighbors say that she acted weird that day. I can only assume that this black creature is the husband out for revenge. I don't know how to stop it in time, so I'm posting this to get the information out there. I should have done it sooner, but anyways, you get the gist. You may be wondering why I worded it all this way. I can't say it flat out, as one of the teenage boys who died earlier tried that and he died on the spot. My friend, he witnessed it. But anyway, I've left a hidden message in here. If I said it out blatantly, I would have died sooner. Of course, that is an assumption. If you're smart, you'll hear the hidden message, and you'll act quickly. The clock just chimed, and the lights on the street just went out. This is probably it for me. My name is Joseph Harrington, if anyone is wondering. I'm not sure if you care though. But anyways, good luck. It Came from the Depths. Written by Alec, 2004. It came from the depths. My grandfather's voice was hoarse and croaky, tainted by years of whiskey, cigarettes, and the cold sea breeze. He served in the Second World War, aboard the freighters that carried food and equipment from Scotland to Murmansk, through the Arctic Circle and the coldest waters that one could find. He always had stories to tell about his time in the Navy, but as time wore on, and as the last few years have passed, he has slowed down. Moving into a rest home was hard for him, and recently I think the whole family, my grandfather included, have realized that he didn't have much longer to go. And so when I visited him for the last time before his passing, he sat me down and began to recount one of his many experiences that he had never shared with anyone. He said that it was important and that I needed to know. And so he turned off his small radio that he kept on his shelf and reclined in his lazy boy as he invited me to sit on his couch. And then he started to speak. It came from the depths. We were a week out of Scapa Flow and had just rounded the tip of Norway. It was a quiet run. We had only lost a freighter to an air attack from some German bombers. Anyway, it was 7:30 and my buddies and I had just sat down for dinner when all of a sudden, all the lights and all the noise on the ship ceased. You could have heard a pin drop in those first few seconds of nothingness. However, the silence was shattered by a bell that called for action stations. I sprang into action, bolting upright. I then made my way towards the bridge of the ship, hopping into a small balcony containing a signal light and flags. Upon orders from one of the officers, I began to signal the other ships traveling with us, saying that we had lost power and we were stationary. Even as I was flashing my lights, I knew that the response wasn't going to be good. We were told that we would have to be left behind. As a stationary ship, we were sitting ducks for a U-boat. I knew at that point that we were screwed. It was a cold December night, and since I had come straight from dinner, I was dressed only in longs, socks, and a fleece. No gloves. It wasn't even a cloudy night. The still ship was a basket in moonlight that illuminated its shape for any patrolling submarine to see us. The worst part was the waiting. Everyone was in action stations, looking out for periscopes or the wake of a torpedo. I was constantly alert, despite being cold and tired. Fear and a constant flow of adrenaline kept me awake. As the moon made its way from one end of the sky to the other, I became increasingly worried that I would freeze in the cold. What had gone wrong down there, I thought to myself. Surely an electrical or mechanical fault wouldn't take this long to fix. I thought that I would go insane. The constant waiting and watching and anticipating wore me out mentally. It was right on midnight when it came. The first thing I remember happening was a waterspout climbing hundreds of feet into the air, showering the starboard side and causing large waves to rock the ship. I was thrown to the ground by the sudden burst of water, but quickly made my way back onto my feet, and after cleaning some seawater out of my eyes, it was then that I observed the most horrifying thing that I've ever witnessed. A large, twisting tentacle emerged from the water. It seemed to be changing colors as it moved. However, each color was clouded by a dark gray tint. It shot through the bow of the ship. Watching from my position, I saw as it picked sailors up and either threw them into the water or pulled them down into the sea. Another tentacle emerged, this time coming from the other side of the ship. It repeated the same procedure as the first. Each tentacle looked so different, as if they each came from different sea monsters. Yet at the same time, they all seemed perfectly symmetrical, wreaking havoc in the same patterns and movements. But then, the body of the thing emerged, and to this day, I cannot find the words to describe it. It was covered in slime. The ever-changing skin of the monster was reflective, yet the reflections that it portrayed were corrupted. Straight lines became swirls, and certain parts of the reflection were enlarged. It was like someone had held a microscope over them. I saw myself in it, my face in the center of its head, swirling and contorting like someone was stretching my skin.
Then its face emerged from the water. Its face was not reflective. In fact, quite the contrary. It was covered in scales, and it was shaped like the face of a giant man, except it possessed a beak in the place of lips. And below said beak was 1,000 smaller tentacles. They all seemed to be feeling around in the air. Its eyes, though, they drew me in the same way that a pretty woman's would. They were concave, yet they seemingly were endless. Beams of light shot through them, and I swear to you that I could see, well, everything. The universe, its creation, and the history of both humanity and of this creature. Instantly, I knew this. This thing was from somewhere else. Not an alien, but perhaps something higher. A celestial being. As I said, I struggled to find the words to describe this thing. But to put it simply, I knew as soon as I looked into its eyes that the creature was infinite. That it was present at the universe's creation. That it was a god. A deity, perhaps. I was snapped out of my trance by the snapping of the ship. We were going down, back down to the depths. I knew that I had to get off and away from the ship, or else I would be sucked down with it to God knows where. So I jumped. My stomach dropped and the cold winter air rushed past my body as I fell into the icy ocean. Without a life jacket, I battled to keep afloat in the freezing water. I quickly shed my socks and began swimming towards a wooden lifeboat. I managed to hop aboard, and I huddled with a few of my shipmates that had managed to survive. It must have only been a minute between me abandoning ship and hopping on the lifeboat. Yet when I looked back over to where the monster was, there was nothing. No monster, no ship. I waited in the freezing cold for another week and a half before I was rescued by the returning convoy. I was the only survivor. I had put on my dead shipmates' clothes to keep warm, and I had fed off of curious seabirds that I had caught when they landed on the small boat. Luckily, one of the men had, for some reason, brought a canteen full of water with him. Once I finished it, I was able to collect rainwater with it. No one believed my story when I arrived back home. They all assumed that I was crazy, and rightly so. Thus, as I recovered in the hospital, I started to tell people that we were torpedoed. It was just easier. You're the first person I've told since then. As you know, I spent the rest of the war working on the docks, and since then, I've never taken to the sea. So, never take to the seas above the Arctic Circle, as it came from the depths, and it will return.
I Saw God in a McDonald's Parking Lot. Written by Yet Darker 245. This isn't a joke, okay? I know how clickbaity the title sounds, but I'm 100% serious. You need to hear this, and you need to hear it now. Something you should know is that I am almost completely deaf. I have been since I was 9, and yeah, it sucks about as much as it sounds. It was due to some freak accident on the road. I barely remember it. Tonight, though, I think that being almost deaf might have saved my life. Or extended it at least. I'll give you some context. I was at McDonald's, drunk with my friend Sarah, who I've known for basically my entire life. It was about 3 a.m. She had driven us there as she was mostly sober, whereas I was watching The Muppets Christmas Carol on my phone and laughing deliriously. Or, in other words, I was completely trashed. We arrived, got a McChicken, whatever. We were just finishing our food when we heard a commotion in the parking lot. Going outside, we saw a small crowd silently gathered around one of the parking spaces. We walked towards the crowd, wanting to see what was happening, when suddenly, ear-splitting static pierced through the otherwise quiet night air. I ripped out my hearing aids, thinking they were malfunctioning or something. They do that sometimes. So I wasn't overly freaked out, just annoyed. I looked over at Sarah and ran over to steady her as I saw her double over in pain. She went limp and collapsed to the ground moments before I reached her. I shook her, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. And noticing that she wasn't breathing, I turned her over to try and give her CPR. What I saw, well, I have no words, no explanations. Her ears were creating pools of blood beneath her. Her eyes were open but unseeing. A toothy grin was etched across her face, the kind that's so wide it hurts. I think I might have screamed, but I was far too shaken to notice. I looked up to the crowd, only to see that all of them were in the same position. Collapsed, glassy eyes, ears bleeding, grinning from ear to ear. I stepped back fearfully, fully ready to run away. Then I saw it. A cloud of static in the center of the crowd of grinning, bleeding corpses. I was frozen to the spot. I could no longer feel my hands. I think I asked why they were smiling, but I don't know why I would ask that. Who did I think would answer? Then it spoke, and I, despite my complete lack of hearing, heard it in complete clarity.
They are smiling because they have received me. I am their god.
And then it was gone. I ran back into the McDonald's, locking myself into a stall in the bathroom. That's where I am now. The cops haven't come yet, but I know someone will come soon. I don't know what to do, what to say. What can I say? I'm having trouble typing this. The blood is dripping onto my screen, warm and wet and flowing. My cheeks hurt. I can't stop smiling. A crisp fall day in 1974, northern Oklahoma. Written by Satellite Boy. The fall was never a particularly happy time growing up on the farm. Something about the gloomy transition to winter was always very depressing, and cast an air of sadness over everything. This year, my uncle had passed away, casting an even larger shadow over me. We weren't sure exactly how he passed away, since when my cousins came across him in the barn, he had already gone to the other side. Or so we thought. The day of his funeral, you could taste the sourness of death in the air. The whole family was extremely distraught, as you could imagine. Many members had tears in their eyes, and no one talked too much. I remember this day vividly because it was the first time that I saw a dead body. I thought that it would affect me more than it did. Instead of feeling grief, sadness, or any other feeling, I just felt nothing. We all gathered at my uncle's house for the wake afterwards. It was very eerie sitting in his living room and being able to see the barn where he had died through the window. A couple of my relatives were standing around a punch bowl and some snacks my aunt had laid out. After about an hour of sitting there in mournful silence, I saw my cousin from across the room. He dropped his beer onto the floor and his skin turned lightning white. He was staring directly at my relatives with a look that looked like he was staring right through them. They all became disturbed by the expression on his face. Everybody knew that something was not right at that moment. They asked him, "What's wrong?" He uttered the name of my uncle and points his finger towards the window behind them. These events all began to unfold in slow motion. Everyone turned around and looked out the window as others ran towards it. I got caught up in the commotion and ran towards the window myself. Suddenly, a shriek pierced the room. My whole family was looking at my recently deceased uncle walking across the yard. The same uncle who I had just seen lying lifeless in his casket. Everybody's face was as white as the moon now, and the silence had returned. My uncle was walking towards the barn, the same one that he had died in. Once he made it inside, he disappeared into the darkness. Time was standing still at this point. It could have been 5 minutes or 50, but eventually my father and some of my cousins rushed outside and they chased after him. They didn't find a single trace of anyone or anything having been there at all. Occasionally, some of my relatives around the same age as myself will bring up the strangeness that we experienced that night. But for the most part, no one in my family will speak of it. I think that they believe something evil came that night, and they don't wish to speak of it, with hopes that it won't return again. And I can't blame them for that. To this day, the fall is more depressing than ever. The feeling of eternal loss is ever present. I pray that my uncle has found peace. But sometimes I wonder if my uncle is still out there, wandering the earth, lost. An ever-present lost soul, trapped on the mortal coal for forever. I Can't Keep the Wolves from the Door Anymore. Written by Spirit of the Wood Knight. My name is Brent Tafton. I moved into a nice middle-class neighborhood out in California after completing my MS in electrical engineering with my dear sweet wife Anna in mid-2006. Things were going well, but when she was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer and deemed inoperable just 9 years after being married, and 3 years after finally getting our life started together. Well, when she passed in 2009 from the cancer, an autopsy revealed that she had been pregnant with, well, what could have been our first and only child. It was in the 3rd week of development. There were times that I could barely keep it together, but I managed to get on with my career and my life. The first 5 years after her passing, I drank so much and I blacked out so often that I'd forget about work or what or who I'd done things with the night before. Finally, my friends and family stepped in and got me help and put me in a rehab facility after I lost my job in 2014. I got out of rehab later that year, and I had been set up with an engineering position for some Indian businessman's construction development project and was given a home to live in. Now, you'd think that everything was back to normal, wouldn't you? Well, you'd be wrong. The first night of being in building 333 on 55 Gypsy Lane after a long day of work with my new employer, well, I was ready for sleep. At 10 p.m., I heard a knock at the door, so I checked it. There was nothing there. Then there was another knock at 11:30 p.m. Again, nothing was there. 12 p.m., knock, knock, knock on the door. The door was being hit so hard that I thought it must be a junkie or gang members looking to kill and rob me. So I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and I flung the door open and stabbed at nothing. Nothing was there once again. I went back to bed thinking that I should make an appointment with a therapist, that it had to be the stress of being sober again, having a new place and a new job, and it was all getting to me. I fell back to sleep when I suddenly heard dogs barking, only it wasn't barking really. It was howling and what sounded like scratching coming from what seemed to be the front door. I looked at my alarm clock, which read 3:33 a.m. I rationalized that it must be some local neighborhood kids playing a prank. So, once again, I stormed to the door, threw it open, and shouted, "Okay, you got me. Funny. Now let me sleep." And then I slammed the door. Before going to work, I talked to my therapist over the phone and I mentioned this. And she agreed that it was probably just nerves or some college kids with too much free time. But it kept on every night for the last 4 years. The same routine. 10 p.m. knock. 11:30 p.m. another knock. 12 p.m. a loud banging. And at 3 a.m. the sound of wolves howling and scratching. And before anyone asks why I didn't just move, I did several times, staying at different hotels. Even once at a hotel in Russia. Whatever it was followed me. I gave up any thought of running from it and trying to cope with it. I've been through every antidepressant, psychotic, ADHD meds, drugs, everything that I could try. Nothing has made it stop. Until 3 months ago exactly, on March 17th, the anniversary of when Anna died. It stopped for 3 nights. I never noticed it stopping during that time because I usually tried to be at work or with friends, family. I also tried to visit her grave, but from the 21st on, things have changed and I don't know why. The knocks changed time, the howling was softer, and there was no scratching. But things were moved when I woke up at first that I thought maybe I started sleepwalking or was losing my memory from insanity caused by either the self-medicating or from enough tranquilizer darts to put a horse down. But as it went on, I noticed a few things, new things. A fresh pack of alphabet magnets that I never bought on the counter. Pieces of ripped up newspaper. A red ribbon and a dog collar. These didn't appear all at once either. I tried to throw them away, but they just came back. Yesterday morning, after finally getting accustomed to the calmer nights, I went to get some OJ from the refrigerator and I saw the magnets, which I didn't place, and I know this as I looked over the CCTV footage from the security cameras that I've placed throughout the house. I had been in bed still all night. Anyway, the letters spelled out, "Connect the pieces, uncover the story." I went over to the pieces of ripped up newspaper that were in the corner as if by some compulsion, and I put the pieces together like a puzzle. 3 different headlines from different dates. The first was, "House burns to the ground in unknown cause. 30 dead." From March 18th, 2007. The second was, "2 hitchhikers dead in hit and run." That was from March 19th, 2009. The third was, "Little girl and dog fatally struck by car." That one was from March 20th, 2013. I looked into the stories. The one about the house that burned down and killed all those people. Well, the fire was thought to have started around 10 p.m. The 2 hitchhikers, they died in the hospital at 11:30 p.m. and 12 a.m. respectively. And the little girl died in the hospital after 6 hours of surgery at exactly 11:33 a.m., along with her dog, named Wolf. My blood ran cold as I read this. I was paralyzed with fear. Tears streamed down my face as reality sank in. I didn't become a drunk because of Anna's passing, but instead because, in grief, I had been day drinking, and I had caused the loss of human lives, and I wanted to forget it. I can't tell my psychiatrist about this, she'll just have me locked up. That night, the knocking didn't stop until 3:33 a.m., and then the howling began, but it sounded like hundreds of wolves and dogs barking and howling all at the same time. Yet, over all of the cacophony, I heard a little girl's voice say in a soft yet slightly distorted voice, "Come with us. We forgive you. Your son Bart is wishing you'd come with us, Brent." The little girl repeated this over and over and over, all the way until 6:45 a.m., when the sun finally came up. On the outside, the door, which was made of reinforced steel, it had been whittled down to a paper thinness. I'm going to church to beg forgiveness today, and then I'm going to send out letters confessing what I've done and apologizing to the families I hurt. But tonight, I think I'll go to them. I just want to say to all of you, to anyone hearing this, if you're afraid of what might be at or behind your door, then be afraid. It might just be the wolves. The Thing from the Hockomock Swamp, written by S.C. Eldrick Creature, 108. Growing up, my entire family was terrified of the swamp on our farm. Now I know why. My older sister and my father hated that marshy area. They said the croaking of the frogs or the rustling of the reeds made them feel uneasy. I was not allowed to go anywhere near it. Our farm was in southeast Massachusetts and encompassed a small part of the infamous Hockomock Swamp. Personally, I didn't understand how such a beautiful, tranquil place could be considered an eerie, paranormal hotspot. My big sister told me that our mother had wandered into the swamp when she was a child and gotten lost. She was found after several days, traumatized and shell-shocked. She refused to tell anyone what had happened. My sister was the only source of information about my mother. She had disappeared shortly after I was born. My father refused to talk about her. She was described as having light blonde hair and ocean blue eyes, just like me. My father's eyes were also blue, but he was bald and clean-shaven. The death of my mother greatly affected my father. He was sometimes cold and distant, but ultimately, he was a loving and caring single father. I think that he did a good job raising his children. During my teenage years, I began to take nightly walks through the farm with our pet Great Dane, named Maxwell. Maxwell was enormous, black as night and fiercely loyal and affectionate. He was my best friend and I trusted him with my life. On the night that I'm here to tell you about, I was just a 16-year-old going out for a nighttime stroll with his dog. There was a cold, autumn breeze in the air, so I wore my bomber jacket over my baggy tracksuit top. It was very bright. The moon shone through the clear night sky, illuminating the terrain around me. Still, I brought my flashlight with me, just in case. Maxwell and I tracked away from the house, through the fields that our cattle grazed on, down the path to the edge of the swamp's lake. Yes, my father had forbidden me from being so close to the swamp, but at the time, I didn't know why he was so scared of it. Alligators, maybe? I didn't know. Just like on any other night, I gazed into the ankle-deep, murky water. Surprisingly, I heard no croaks from the frogs. Despite the breeze, the reeds did not rustle. It was silent, unnaturally silent. Maxwell's hackles rose and he began to growl. I pulled out my flashlight and I shone it onto the water. I could see nothing out of the ordinary. This was perplexing. Was there an animal in the swamp that I couldn't see? I heard a faint buzzing sound, like the sound of a mosquito. Except this one began to grow louder and louder and louder. A chill ran up my spine. A pair of glowing, luminous eyes appeared floating just above the surface of the water. Maxwell barked. The eyes responded by rising up. The flashlight and the moonlight combined, revealing a small mouth with multiple rows of teeth and a filthy yellow tongue hanging out of it. Swamp water dripped out of their mouth. The eyes continued to rise up into the air as more and more of its body dexterously emerged from the swamp. The abomination drew itself up to its full height. It was easily 9 feet tall, vaguely humanoid in shape, and it had a body composed of pine needles and tendrils that stretched and squirmed like worms. It awkwardly lumbered towards us. Like any sensible person, I turned around and bolted, screaming for help. Maxwell, however, remained behind, facing the creature defiantly. I glanced back and I saw my best friend digging his claws into the creature's left arm. Ear-splitting howls and groans pierced the air. I'm ashamed to say it, but I abandoned my dog and I ran like a coward back to the house, stumbling blindly over stones and other obstacles. At last, I reached home. I dashed through the front door, slamming it behind me. My sister and father were relaxing in the living room, watching TV. My father saw the look on my face. He glanced down, trying to find Maxwell. A look of understanding passed over his face. Wordlessly, he switched off the TV, fetched his shotgun, threw on a winter coat, and picked up a lantern. He called for Bella, our beautiful German shepherd, and went out, telling us not to make a sound. My sister and I cuddled up, quivering and shivering with fear, not daring to make a sound. In the distance, I could hear more howling and groaning, along with the bang of gunshots. My father returned just after sunrise the next morning. He didn't have any ammunition left. Bella was by his side. In his free hand, he carried Maxwell's tattered orange collar. After I told my story, we all agreed that we would stop the nightly walks and that we would give the swamp an even wider berth than before. My father dismissed all of my questions, saying that they were unimportant. In the end, we buried Maxwell's collar in the garden. I never saw the creature from the swamp again. My father became even more withdrawn after the incident. He would spend long hours in his room muttering to himself. He never fully recovered and committed suicide 31 years later. To respect our privacy, I've not included any of our names. Though my father passed away a year ago, I haven't ever forgotten his and Maxwell's bravery. These days, I stay in the city. I'm a 48-year-old New Yorker with a family of my own. I frequently wake up in cold sweats. My dreams are filled with horrific abominations and nightmarish swamps. What scares me the most is this. Before my father killed himself, he wrote a note. It was short, saying only, "It's come back. It's searching for me." Many people think that he had gone mad, but I know the truth.